This is Shams DaBaron, the art of storytelling. A great screenwriter basically is a person that can tell a great story. You know, at the end of the day, it really starts and ends with the story. I believe that everybody has a story to tell. It's just some people are more skillful at telling it than others. When you look at storytelling, to me, I think, you know, every story has certain elements that kind of are like similar. In most stories, you have a protagonist and you have an antagonist. So when I look at storytelling, I look at it from that perspective. I look at that hero, and I always refer to Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which, you know, they got this thing called the hero's journey from that. And the hero's journey basically describes the trajectory of the protagonist from a person being in an ordinary world, being thrust into a different world, and having to go on this journey where there's a transformation that takes place at some point during the story, mostly at the end of the story. So to me, you know, regardless of what that protagonist is or what that hero or who that hero is, you know, it could be an anti-hero. But regardless of that, the bottom line is, in telling a story, that person is not a stoic character. It's not a character that just stays the same. It's not a one-dimensional character. That character has to be a three-dimensional character. In terms of telling a story, we're looking at character, and then of course we're looking at plot. And when you're looking at plot, you're looking at things that move the story forward. So in studying, you know, screenwriting and stuff like that, I learned that in the trajectory of a story, you have certain things that are called like plot points, you know, and these are things that move the story further, or they sort of like switch the story. They put the story in a different place, you know. It's like almost like twists and turns, you know. And so when you're looking at telling a story, you want to look at those things that stand out along the way of that story, you know. So when I'm doing a screenplay, I set it up where there are like 40 beats to the screenplay, and in the 40 beats, those could basically be called 40 scenes. You know, nothing is written in stone, and of course there's no real rules to telling a story, but you know, certain formulas work, especially in the context of Hollywood, in the context of telling a story. So with 40 beats, and let's say if those were 40 scenes, you're going 3 minutes per scene for the average scene, give or take a few, you know, that would basically come to 120 minutes of the screenplay. Along the way, break the screenplay up into 3 acts. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Within Act 1, that's where you have your opening scene. Then somewhere along the line, you know, probably halfway into Act 1, you have something called the catalyst, or the crisis moment, or the inciting incident. And that's when basically, you know, you've been introduced to all the characters, you know the setting, and at that point, you kind of figure out what the story's about, or what the problem is that the protagonist or the hero face. So that's like halfway through the first act, which, you know, if you measure it, it might be maybe 15 minutes into the screenplay or into the movie. And then towards the end of Act 1, or by the end of Act 1, you reach a first turning point, something that shifts the story. This is when your hero is basically challenged and forced to undergo this journey, you know, or ends up deciding to go to the journey after they have refused it earlier in the story. And that thrusts the hero into Act 2. And Act 2 is where a lot of the action begins. That's where the hero is fighting along this journey, and the hero ends up going to battling its opponent, the antagonist, or whatever the case is, goes through its trials and tribulations. At times the hero, you see them winning, and then at times they may, you know, suffer setbacks that may be towards the midpoint of Act 2. And then you go further on into where you get to your second turning point, which would be the end of Act 2. And that's when basically all is lost. And, and none of this is written in stone, but just giving you some type of overview of how this works. And then going into Act 3, of course, Act 3 is the build-up that leads to the climax, and that's that high point of the story where there's this big showdown and stuff like that. And, at the end of the day, in most stories, the hero would win. Of course, there's always tragedies where the hero might lose. In most stories, the hero wins, and so that's when the guy gets the girl and stuff like that. And then the resolution is the ending of the story, maybe the closing scene, and that's where the hero leaves with the girl or achieves its goal or comes out victorious and walks off into the sunset. One of the most noteworthy, one of the ones that most people talk about is George Lucas's Star Wars. That is probably the one that's cited more often than not. And that's because George Lucas, I believe, when he was fleshing out the story for Star Wars, he had kept doing rewrites and stuff like that. And he ended up revisiting the book and Joseph Campbell, and in doing that and studying the myths, he ended up figuring out how to tell that story better and redrafting his screenplay to where he used the elements of a hero's journey for the character of Luke Skywalker and the entire story and stuff like that. So when you look at Star Wars, you're seeing that in the beginning, I believe, it's a setup with Princess Leia and all of that. But then when they approach Luke and they tell him about this mission or whatever the case is, Luke is reluctant. He's like, nah, I'm not with it. He's in this ordinary world, and that's where the story always began. He's in this ordinary world. He don't want no disruptions. He's cool, whatever, until something happens. That's that inciting incident where it kind of like changes things for him. And now he's like, oh, god damn. And he has to actually take the mission. So along this journey, you're going to meet certain characters, and these are things that help to flesh out the story even more, So they help to also develop subplots, In the case of Star Wars, let's just say he meets people like Obi-Wan Kenobi and different people that provide mentorship. So in the hero's journey, you're going to meet a mentor, somebody that gives you guidance, or whether it's like a Yoda character or whatever, they're going to give you guidance and help you along the way. You're going to meet someone who gives you tools to help you along the journey and stuff like that. So Star Wars is one of the #1 movies that incorporates the hero's journey.